Imagine this scenario. You studied English for, I don't know, 5 years. You know the grammar inside and out.
Right.
You ace the proficiency tests, and you can read complex articles without breaking a sweat. So you sit down with absolute confidence in your very first corporate meeting in London or New York.
I'm feeling good.
Totally. And within 5 minutes, your manager says, let's touch base to ensure we don't cut in corners before we bite the bullet.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Suddenly, panic sets in. You realize your textbook completely lied to you. You understand the words touch, base, cut, and bullet. But combined.
It's just absolute nonsense.
Exactly. You realize you don't speak business English at all. So welcome to our deep dive into the sources. Today, we are exploring a really special focus for our listeners over at The English Effect.
It really is a terrifying moment for any professional. I mean, we hear from B1 and C1 level English learners all the time who hit this exact wall.
Yeah, they hit it hard.
Because understanding the literal words in a meeting, that's actually the easy part. The real barrier is the unwritten code, the indirect meaning of business idioms.
And that is our mission today. We are doing a deep dive into the sources, this massive stack of linguistic history, corporate communication guides, cultural research, basically, to decode 15 essential phrases. We want to take you from feeling utterly confused to sounding like a natural, confident professional.
Because mastering these phrases isn't just a vocabulary exercise, it's a strategic advantage. It allows you to decipher what your colleagues are actually demanding of you without them having to say it directly.
Right. So let's jump right into the deep end. We have a project, and before it can succeed, well, someone has to actually start it. Our sources repeatedly highlight this phrase, getting the ball rolling.
A classic.
Now, whenever I hear getting the ball rolling, I instantly picture, like, Sisyphus from Greek mythology, sweating and straining to push a massive, heavy boulder up a steep hill. It sounds exhausting. Does getting the ball rolling basically mean taking on a massive initial burden, just taking the first step to start a process?
It's funny you say that because it's actually the exact opposite. It's not about an uphill battle or a heavy burden at all. It comes from sports, like croquet or lawn bowling.
Oh, really?
Yeah, think about a smooth grass field. You give the ball a light, easy initial tap, and the momentum just carries it forward. So getting the ball rolling simply means taking that vital, relatively easy first step to start a process.
Oh, okay.
You aren't finishing the project, you were just initiating the momentum, getting the ball rolling.
That makes so much more sense. So a manager might say, let's focus on getting the ball rolling on the new marketing campaign, meaning let's just make the first phone call or draft the first email, tap the ball.
Exactly.
But what happens when you bring someone brand new onto that campaign team? They don't know the systems, they don't know the people, so we say they are learning the ropes. Is this about tying things together?
Not quite. Learning the ropes means taking the time to understand the basics of a job or a task. And the origin here is incredibly literal. It comes from the old days of sailing ships.
Wait, sailing ships, like literal ropes holding up the sails?
Literal ropes. A tall ship had miles and miles of complex rigging. And new sailors had to memorize exactly what every single one did.
Wow.
Because if you pulled the wrong rope during a storm, you could capsize the ship. So today, learning the ropes means you are figuring out how things work at a new job. That means taking the time to understand the basics of a job or task, both the official software systems and the unwritten cultural rules.
Right, so you don't accidentally sink the company project.
Precisely. You have to spend time learning the ropes.
I love the imagery of that. But I have to push back here a little bit. Based on what we see in modern corporate culture, modern business is notoriously impatient.
Very true.
What if a new hire doesn't have time for learning the ropes? What if the company expects immediate, profitable results and you literally can't spend 3 months figuring out where the printer paper is?
Well, that is a very real and honestly very stressful scenario for a lot of professionals. And it introduces our third idiom perfectly. When there is no time for orientation, the expectation is that you will hit the ground running.
Hit the ground running. Meaning starting a task with intense energy and making immediate progress. It makes me think of jumping out of a moving vehicle where your legs are already sprinting before your feet even touch the asphalt.
You are very close with the vehicle analogy, actually. It comes from the military, specifically paratroopers dropping into a combat zone.
Oh, wow, of course.
Yeah, they couldn't just land, stretch their legs, look around and have a coffee. They had to hit the ground running to survive. They started moving the second they landed, starting a task with intense energy and immediate progress. So if your boss says they need someone who can hit the ground running, They're explicitly telling you there is zero training period.
Okay, so you've got someone who has hit the ground running. They are sprinting, but how does a manager make sure they aren't sprinting in the completely wrong direction? I mean, if everyone is running blindly, the project is doomed.
Right, it's chaos.
You have to coordinate. And the phrase I hear constantly for this is touch base. Like, hey, let's touch base on Tuesday. I always assume this is baseball.
It is baseball. Players literally have to touch the base to be safe and stay in the game. In a corporate office, to touch base means briefly connecting to check progress or share a quick update.
Right.
But let's pause here for a second because this raises a really critical issue for our B1 to C1 learners, and that's tone. Registers everything.
Oh, totally. So is touch base too informal? Could I send a message to the CEO of a Fortune 500 company and say, hey, I'll touch base with you later?
I would strongly advise against that.
Yeah, probably a bad idea.
Touch base is conversational shorthand. It is perfect for quick, informal check-ins with your peers, your immediate team, or a friendly manager, briefly connecting to check progress. But it is entirely too casual for a high-stakes board presentation or an email to a conservative stakeholder. You really have to read the room.
That makes total sense. You want to touch base with your team informally to make sure you are all on the same page. Now, I use this one all the time. Being all on the same page basically means having a mutual understanding, right? Like, we all agree on the goals of the project.
It's actually stronger than just agreeing. It implies perfect synchronization. To be all on the same page means having a mutual understanding. But the origin gives it this beautiful context. It comes from choral singers.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Imagine a choir of 50 people holding sheet music. If even one person is looking at page 4 while everyone else is singing from page 5, the entire harmony is ruined. It just becomes noise.
Oh, that's brilliant. If you aren't all on the same page, the music sounds terrible. And if you aren't all on the same page at work, having that mutual understanding, the workflow is just chaos.
Exactly.
Because if someone isn't looking at that page, they are likely out of the loop. Which, if you are listening to this and you've ever sat in an office feeling like everyone knows a secret you don't, well, that is exactly what being out of the loop feels like.
It is a profoundly isolating feeling. Being out of the loop means being uninformed or completely excluded from the decision-making process.
Yeah.
Think of a loop of communication, like an ongoing email chain or a closed-door meeting. If you are standing outside of that circle, you are out of the loop.
And nobody wants to be out of the loop at work. It means you lack the basic information needed to do your job.
So let's look at the natural consequence of all this. You start the project, you communicate, but what happens when you touch base with the team, you look at the data, and you all realize the project is completely disastrously failing? It happens to the best of us. And when it does, the standard corporate response is to demand that the team start thinking outside the box.
Now, to me, thinking outside the box means thinking creatively, looking beyond traditional constraints. You have a problem, and the normal solutions aren't working, so you have to escape the invisible walls you've built around the issue. Is that right?
That is a great way to visualize it. Thinking outside the box means to think unconventionally, looking beyond traditional constraints. However, sometimes creative thinking just isn't enough to save a doomed project.
Right.
Sometimes the box isn't just restrictive. The box is entirely broken. And when that happens, you have to go back to the drawing board.
Go back to the drawing board. Meaning, returning to the planning stage after a failure. I always assumed this just meant tweaking the plan a little bit.
That's much more severe than a tweak. This originates from engineers and architects in the 1940s. They literally drafted blueprints on massive wooden drawing boards. If a prototype airplane crashed during a test flight, they couldn't just adjust a screw. They had to walk all the way back to their desks, throw away the old paper, and go back to the drawing board to draft a brand new blueprint from scratch. Returning to the planning stage after a failure.
I have to admit, that sounds incredibly frustrating. Nobody wants to admit defeat and start over.
It is deeply frustrating. And that emotional toll perfectly sets up our next idiom: bite the bullet. When you are facing that frustration, when you have to walk into your boss's office and admit the prototype crashed, you just have to bite the bullet.
Now, I know biting the bullet means enduring a painful, inevitable situation, just forcing yourself to do the hard thing. But the imagery is so violent. Why a bullet?
Because it comes from 19th century battlefield medicine, before the invention of modern anesthesia.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah. Battlefield surgeons had to perform amputations or pull out shrapnel while the soldier was completely awake. To keep them from screaming in agony or biting their own tongues off, the surgeon would hand them a lead bullet and tell them to bite down as hard as they could.
Wow, that is grim. But honestly, it perfectly captures the feeling of corporate failure. Delivering terrible news to a client feels exactly like surgery without anesthesia. You just have to bite the bullet, endure that painful, inevitable situation, mask your pain, and get it over with.
And this brings us to an interesting shift in the workplace dynamic. Once you've survived the failure, you've bitten the bullet, and you have a new plan, the focus shifts entirely to execution. Strict standards become everything.
Right, because you can't afford to fail twice. Our sources contrast two very different ways of executing work, doing things by the book versus cutting corners.
Yes.
I like to think of doing things by the book as the difference between baking a cake and cooking a soup. If I'm making soup, I can throw random vegetables in a pot, but if I'm baking a cake, I have to follow the recipe exactly, the exact flour ratio, the exact oven temperature. If I don't do it by the book following procedures and rules strictly, the cake collapses.
That analogy works perfectly because it highlights risk. By the book means following procedures and rules strictly, exactly as they are written in the company manual, the literal book. When a project has already failed once, managers want zero risk. They want it done by the book. The exact opposite of that is cutting corners.
Cutting corners means sacrificing quality or safety just to save time or money, right?
Yes, sacrificing quality to save resources. And the origin here is agricultural. Imagine a farmer plowing a massive rectangular field with a horse-drawn plow. Turning that heavy plow sharply at a 90-degree angle in the corners of the field is exhausting, time-consuming work.
Let me guess. A lazy farmer would just steer in a wide sweeping circle, skipping the corners completely.
Precisely. They would save themselves an hour of hard labor, but they left perfectly good land unplowed. They were cutting corners. In a modern business context, if you cutting corners sacrificing quality or safety just to save time or money, you might hit your Friday deadline, but the software will have bugs or the product will break. You've sacrificed the long-term yield for short-term comfort.
And if you want to truly impress your clients, you absolutely cannot be cutting corners. Instead, the sources say you need to raise the bar. To raise the bar means to increase standards. This one is obviously from high jumping and track and field, right?
It is. The literal physical bar the athlete has to jump over is moved higher. To increase standards or expectations is to raise the bar. But here is the catch. To reach that new height, to clear that raised bar, you have to go the extra mile.
Going the extra mile means making a special effort beyond expectations, doing more than your job description demands.
Exactly, making a special effort beyond what is strictly required. And the physical reality of going the extra mile is that it often requires you to burn the midnight oil.
Let me define that one. To burn the midnight oil means working late into the night. Because historically, before electricity and LED desk lamps, if you were awake at 2 a.m. finishing an accounting ledger, you were literally burning oil in your lamp.
Exactly. Working late into the night. And all of this intense effort, doing things by the book, raising the bar, going the extra mile, and burning the midnight oil, it all leads to one ultimate final destination in the corporate world. The bottom line.
Ah, the bottom line. It means the most essential point or the final result.
In financial accounting, the literal bottom line on a spreadsheet is the final net profit or loss figure. After you calculate all the revenue and subtract all the expenses, that bottom line tells you if you succeeded or failed. But in everyday conversation, the bottom line simply means the most essential point, stripping away all other distractions.
So if a manager interrupts a long presentation and says, look, the bottom line is we need more sales, they are saying, ignore all the other details. This is the final, most crucial takeaway.
You've got it. Now, we've walked through the mechanics of all these idioms, but knowing the textbook definition is only half the battle. Applying them in real life without sounding like a walking dictionary is the real test for B1 and C1 learners.
Yes, let's demonstrate this. Let's do a role play. We will improvise a short, difficult meeting to show how these phrases actually sound in the wild.
Sounds good.
But first, let me show you what not to do. What if I walk into a meeting and say, we must get the ball rolling so we can hit the ground running while learning the ropes to raise the bar?
Oh, I would assume you were an artificial intelligence from 2010 trying to impersonate a human CEO. It sounds ridiculous. It is idiom overload.
Exactly. So let's do it naturally. You be the manager and I'll be the employee. We are talking about a major project that has been delayed. Ready?
I'm ready.
Hi there. Thanks for coming in. I wanted to touch base with you regarding the software launch. I feel a bit out of the loop because I haven't seen any updates this week. Are we all on the same page about Friday's deadline?
I'm glad you brought this up. To be honest, we hit a major bug in the code. We had to go back to the drawing board on the user interface. We've been trying to think outside the box to fix it, but we are officially behind schedule.
Okay, I appreciate the honesty, but the client is furious. We can't be cutting corners on the code, but we also can't miss this deadline entirely. We are just going to have to bite the bullet and tell them it will be delayed by 3 days. But to hit that new deadline, we need to get the ball rolling on a massive bug fix sprint today. The team is going to have to burn the midnight oil this week.
Understood. We'll go the extra mile to get it done strictly by the book. The bottom line is we need more testing time, but we will deliver.
Scene. Okay, that was an intense meeting. But notice how natural that felt compared to my robot impression earlier.
It felt natural because we used the idioms as conversational shorthand, not as the main focus of the sentence. For our listeners aiming to avoid sounding robotic, notice that we spaced them out. We use natural intonation. Instead of saying, I will endure this painful, inevitable situation, you just sigh, drop your shoulders, and say, I'll bite the bullet.
Right.
It softens the delivery of bad news and makes you sound culturally fluent, not just grammatically correct.
So, as we wrap up, let's look at the journey we've gone on today. We started at the initiation phase, figuring out how to get the ball rolling and hit the ground running when we didn't have time for learning the ropes. We learned how to touch base formally and informally to keep our teams all on the same page so nobody feels out of the loop.
We navigated the frustration of failure by thinking outside the box, sometimes going back to the drawing board, and having the stoic courage to bite the bullet. And finally, we looked at the discipline of execution. Why we should do things by the book instead of cutting corners, how to raise the bar, go the extra mile, and burn the midnight oil to ensure that the bottom line is a massive success.
That is a lot to take in, so here's my actionable advice for you, the listener. Do not try to memorize all 15 of these at once. Pick just 2 or 3 idioms this week. Try saying, let's touch base tomorrow in a low-pressure email, or ask, what's the bottom line here, in a casual meeting. See how it feels in your mouth.
And as you practice those, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We've unpacked the origins of all these phrases today. Did you notice how many of them come from competitive sports like baseball, croquet, and high jumping, or from the military like paratroopers and battlefield surgery?
I hadn't thought about that.
What does that say about how Western corporate culture fundamentally views business? Is the office meant to be a team sport, or is it actually a battlefield?
Wow, that changes how you look at the office entirely. It really is a psychological game. Listeners, if you enjoyed this deep dive into the sources and you want to keep mastering the hidden codes of the workplace, please like this episode, share it with a colleague who might be feeling a bit out of the loop themselves, and most importantly, subscribe to the English Effect channel so you never miss our future explorations.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Remember, language isn't just a set of binary textbook rules. It is the living, breathing culture of the people using it. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
And the next time you step into the world of corporate communication and the pristine illusions of your English textbook shatter into a million pieces, don't panic. You aren't out of the loop anymore. You have the secret code now. Talk to you soon.